mind, we are recording this, so if you don't get something or if you got to leave, we'll be sending out a link here later today where you can recap and hear the rest of the conversation, or go back and rewind a bit and listen to a specific topic or a question. So, Jeff, we're at the kind of the first stage of transition to the Sun Belt, or to consider new construction in the golf community. Can you, as someone who's lived in both Scottsdale, Naples, and been to the other golf markets in the South, can you give listeners just some insight on how things that they should consider or think about before determining the right market for them and what market they're going to move forward and build in?
Certainly, Jason. Good morning to everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar. What I thought I would do is share a few points from my personal experiences over the last 27 plus years of living in the Sun Belt. I moved to Naples, Florida in 1992 from Stowe, Vermont, of all places. Talk about a change in latitudes, but much welcomed, and I've been here ever since. But then we did buy a second home out in Phoenix, Arizona, Scottsdale area, as my career shifted at that point in time. And that was from just recently, 2011 to 2018. But I'm talking to you today back from my home here in Naples, Florida. Some of the lessons learned, excuse me, from that experience, would include the following. I think a serious thing you really want to be thinking about is, what's the weather like? The seasonality. When the seasonality in both areas of Phoenix, Scottsdale, and Naples, Florida, from mid-September to late May, during the quote-unquote season, is absolutely wonderful in both environments. It's fantastic. But keep in mind that, Florida maintains a much more humid environment year-round, while the Phoenix, Arizona area is a desert area, and it's very, very dry. So those are things you want to be thinking about. The June to mid-September period, obviously, are very warm and downright hot, in my opinion. Neither offer, if you're a golfer, for instance, a whole lot of golfing weather other than really early in the morning or late in the afternoon, early evening. And I can attest from my experience in both environments that not many people partake in golf during the day in either location. So that's something you want to be thinking about. Maybe the Carolinas are a little bit better because they're not as extreme, but they don't have that long seasonality during the September to June months. Another key consideration is relative to your travel. How far away will you be from an airport, and what airlines are available? Do they have direct flights and things of that nature? My experience in the Phoenix to Naples travel, there were no direct flights, and it involved 8 hours at best to go from city to city. So that's always something you want to think about, the proximity of the airport between if you have two homes or your family in another area, and wherever it is you decide to live in the Sun Belt. And you want to keep in mind that pertains not only you, but your extended family that are coming to visit from time to time, and friends for that matter. You may be doing a member guest and have some friends coming down, so you want to be thinking about that. What do you enjoy doing? That's really critical. You and your family, what is it you really enjoy? And entertainment and sports and theater, dining out. Is it retail? Do you enjoy shopping, or does your spouse enjoy shopping? Is continuing education important? These are all important things to be thinking about. For instance, in Phoenix, a major league market, you've got football, baseball, basketball, hockey. You can be very spontaneous for the most part and go and enjoy those events. Naples is a great town. We have baseball spring training, but if you really want to take in major league sports, you're probably going up to Tampa or over to Miami. So you're talking an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending on where you want to go. So you need to be thinking about that as well. And then, the surrounding environment, out in Phoenix, for instance, if you wanted to go to a national park, if that's your thing, and you like to hike and things of that nature, you have so many different options out there to take advantage of. And in Naples, if your love is water, beach, Gulf of Mexico, boating, fishing, things of that nature, you aren't going to find that in Phoenix without traveling a bit. But in Naples, it's right here in your backyard. One final comment that I'd like to touch on, and then we can move on, is taxes. Phoenix, Arizona, you state income taxes. Florida, you have none. Sales taxes, property taxes, estate taxes should all be explored before you really leap into it, so you have a better understanding of the environment.
Thank you, Jeff. That's perfect. Sorry, I was on mute there. One final comment that I would share is just, it can get really granular, even in the state of Florida, the difference between Palm Beach County and Naples and that area. So I always suggest, especially if you're early on in the process, is to spend a week or two and rent each season in a different marketplace, and really get a feel of the culture and the people there. To rent and pay $1,000, $1,500 for a condo and to get to experience it, could certainly avoid a major financial mistake if it turns out that that marketplace you thought was going to be the right one just doesn't pan out
Excellent
that way.
point. That is certainly a great thing to be looking into.
Mhm. Well, moving along, we're going to bring Fred in on this one. And Fred's been in the real estate business for a long time, has built a number of homes or helped his clients build homes. And so I asked him to come to the table and explain uh, the best processes in choosing the right developer for a client, or someone that's coming to a marketplace. And then Jeff's going to add some insight as well. So Fred, there's dozens of developers across the Sun Belt. What are some key things that you found or questions that you've told your clients to ask to find that perfect home builder for them?
Yes, thanks, Jason, and good morning to everyone that's listening in. The first thing I would say is certainly consult with trusted advisors. Um, have your real estate broker accompany you from your first visit into the different communities. It doesn't cost you a thing. Their compensation is built into the marketing budget of the community. So it's free consultation, and they can give you a lot of good advice during the process. Secondly, I would say know who you're dealing with. Are you in a community that is being developed by a company that is publicly traded versus a private developer? They both can be very, very good, but you should know who you're dealing with, because there will be subtle differences. Is the developer experienced in the area? Have they finished prior communities that they've built in a timely manner? Very important. The amenity facilities. Do they have a track record of building the clubhouse and the fitness center on time, or do folks have to wait, for years until the community's almost built out before those facilities are built? Sales price. Be aware that sales price is normally firm in a developer community, but typically you can negotiate other things like upgrades to your home or maybe a deal on the golf membership. So the price won't change. The developers must maintain their integrity with price, but typically you can negotiate a few little extras here and there. Next, I would say, does the construction activity pass the eye test? You can be in the sales center and they're telling you how great things are going, but are there any bulldozers outside moving dirt, and are there workers pounding nails building houses? So you want to make sure that the construction activity is matching up with what you're being told at the sales center. And I think that would do it for now for me.
Thank you, Fred. And Jeff, did you want to weigh in on I know we talked about this yesterday. You had some interesting color on the different builders as you worked for one for yourself for a number of years, and how a consumer might be able to get some more information on each.
Yeah, and Fred makes great points about, what phase is the community at? Your eyes don't lie when you start looking around or driving from what are maybe phases or neighborhood to neighborhood within a community. You get a sense of what's going on within the community. That's really the developer perspective. And what's the timeline for that developer to ultimately turn the community over. Going into their relationship with their builders, one of the things that I always think is imperative to know is, if you have, I'm going to give you an example, if you have a 500 home community within a development, and let's say they're at home 100 as far as what has a roof on it and has been sold and occupied, and they have a few model homes in there, what do the builders actually own? Have the builders bought the lots? Do they own them, or is there a takedown schedule and understanding that they're going to take them down? Because once they own them, typically you've got a compulsion to build timeline. So that's a question you were going to want to ask when you're in that sales center that Fred talked about. You know, how many lots are actually still under the developer's ownership versus the builders? That's a really critical point in terms of timelines of turnover and who's responsible for what. You also want a better understanding of the variety of product within a community, and whether or not you have just simply single family homes, or do you have condos, villas, townhouses, etc. Because they're going to weigh in on a subject we're going to talk about in a bit, which is the master association docs and the sub-association docs in terms of who has the power of the vote of majority, etc. So those are all important. And Fred did mention the amenities, you know, what's built, what's being promised, and yet to be built. You know, it's just a poster in the sales center. So those are all important subjects.
Jeff, quick question for you, maybe Fred can answer too, is there a way for a consumer to look into the future of what their HOA monthly or quarterly dues might be as a comparison to the amenities that the club has and the number of homes built? In other words, if it's a 300 home development and it just has a community pool, is it safe or fair to say that your HOAs are going to be a little bit less than it would be if there's a golf course and all the amenities there?
Yeah, and Fred, you want to jump in on that, Fred? You made a couple of great points yesterday when we were talking about this. You may be on a mute.
Yep. Certainly, any of these communities, the HOA is a non-profit organization in theory, so it is their vested interest to keep the fees as low as possible, and certainly the amount of amenities will factor into whether how high or how low the fees are. One thing that I would tell you is not to be surprised when the HOA fees go up when the community is turned over to the members. Typically, the developer keeps those fees artificially low.
Very good.
Yeah,
very good.
I want to add one more thing on there. That is really important. What Fred just said. You definitely want to know what you're surrounded with as far as completion. As you add amenities, the developer is subsidizing those amenities until turnover, and you know they're going to keep those HOA dues artificially low, if you will, to help them with their sales efforts. So that is something to be keeping in mind as amenities come online in a community.
Thank you both. Appreciate that. So Jeff, if there's one thing that you know well, it's these documentations and the master association docs that go and are involved in golf communities and developer managed communities. Can you just share in some insight of what that is like when you get those docs and what questions to ask, things to look for?
Absolutely. It's the process is an emotional one. Let's face it. And hopefully it's a fun and a happy experience as you're going through it. But you've got to keep in mind that the documents is the governance of where you're going to live, where your home is, and where the rubber meets the road in terms of experience as you go through the process prior to and post turnover. But once you found your home, you've discovered where it is you really want to live, you put a flag in the ground. Before you sign any contractual agreements, you really need to review and digest your documents before that engagement. You want to keep in mind, you've got master association docs. They supersede any sub-association neighborhood docs. So you want to make sure you understand that, because if your sub-association docs say one thing and there's a contrary statement in the master docs prevail. Your club docs, which is another set of documents in most environments, they stand alone typically, and that is with the exception of a bundled community or one that's governed by the master association. But if the club is standalone, you got to read that set of docs as well. Another point to keep in mind as you're reading through and understanding what governs the community are the articles of incorporation always will trump the bylaws. And what does that mean? Well, that means that the articles, which are usually short and succinct in nature, will spell out certain conditions that will, for any change post-developer, will require a majority vote of the owners. And in some instances, it's 50% plus one vote. In other instances, it's a super majority. Can run anywhere from 2/3 to 90%. I've seen all the above. So you want to understand that the articles are post-developer turnover are the owner's vote and decision making. Bylaws are different. Bylaws post-turnover, boards can change with a majority vote. And again, it could be a simple majority and it may be a super majority, but you want to understand those differences, because that's some people get really upset once you get into post-turnover and discover that there's some condition that's going to be subject to change and the board can change it. A particular subject on that is the Architectural Review Board, and what is prohibited and what's allowed within a community, and what you really want to be thinking about there and paying particular attention to is your home, landscaping, walls, fences, statuary, and other related elements. Do you have children? You want to have a basketball hoop in your driveway? A lot of communities prohibit that. Commercial vehicles in a driveway, prohibited in a lot of these gated communities in both Arizona and Florida that I've been very familiar with. So you want to understand that. If you have any uncertainties once you read through, get legal counsel. It's the smartest money you can spend. Jason, you mentioned if you're unfamiliar with an area, go ahead and do a long-term lease, get it down there for a month, 3 months, whatever it may be, to get familiar with it. Very true with your documents as well. Spend those dollars on legal counsel if you don't understand some of the issues that are coming up as you're reading these documents. Your trusted advisor, Fred mentioned, real estate realtors. That's fine. Most realtors are not lawyers, so you just keep that in mind. It's probably the best money you'll spend on your decision.
So Jeff, if you're reading docs and you find something and your lawyer finds something that just doesn't, you don't want in there, or you want to edit, are documentations from the developers, are they even open to amending those types of things, or you just kind of sign it or you're done with it?
Well, during developer control, you aren't going to have many developers that are going to be amenable to opening up a document and making an amendment. I would think, a subject we're going to touch on here today is transition. And at that point in time, that's certainly a consideration at that point in time.
Very good. Thank you. So we're going to shift to a little bit away from the construction side, or the home side, I should say, and talk a little golf. Lynn Josephson is joining us. He's the president of Golf Life Navigators. Been in South Florida, the PGA of America, for 30 or 40 years now, and more importantly, has recently built a home himself in a gated golf developer managed community in Naples. And so I thought it would be great to have Lynn on to not only share what life is like during that construction, but just some extra things that consumers can expect as a golf member during the build out of a development.
Good morning, and thank you, everybody. Jason, your introduction earlier said that I've been in here 1 year. Well, it's going to have been 3 years in June. I know we've been busy in our company and working hard, but 2 years have passed. So anyways, interestingly, and I joined when I knew that this was going to be a new development. I jumped in early. And one of the reasons I jumped in early was I thought I could buy my lot at a reasonably price and hoping that it's going to appreciate. Secondly and probably more importantly, I had my first pick of lots. So where I lived on the golf course or not, and I particularly picked a lot that is not actually facing the golf course. I'm off the golf course near some woods, facing woods, and so I do not see the golf course. That was a choice that I had made. Having worked in the business all those years, I didn't want to come home and continue to work it. But there, you have your choice, and that is great. So my street, there's only one more house to be built, and then all of the construction is going to be off of our street, and actually the next street to it is also almost built out. So we get in early, get the construction out of here. You had mentioned earlier is kind of major decisions. Also, the fact that if somebody comes in and wants to be on the golf course, please check and make sure exactly where that lot is. Is it close to a green where you might be hearing lawnmowers early in the morning, or a tee? Is it close to the golf course to where you might be getting golf balls hit into your backyard or your screen porch? lot location to me is really, really important. And then I want to go back to, a little bit about your HOVs, guys, that you were talking about earlier. Very interesting. Golf Club of Everglades and Greyhawk, where I'm in, is a very interesting setup in that the development of the houses is in a gated community. The golf course is in and through it, but the club actually has a whole completely separate entrance. And it is even though it's owned by the same developer, they're two separate entities. So I know that what I'm paying for my HO fees is just covering my community center, my lawn, and all of those things. None of my HOA fees is going to support the golf course. The golf course is supported by the members that join that. So this particular community, I can elect to join the club, pay an additional fee, or not. So I liked it because I belong to a separate club that's nearby, so I did not need to join the golf course. So it's a real interesting setup, but a very important one.
And Lynn, so from the time that you put a shovel in the ground to you close, how long was that? Well, how long did that take?
Look, this is a Pulte development that I'm in, and I will tell you something, they've got it down to a science. Even though they're a track builder, that you have the ability, and I know, Jason, that you're kind of going through some of this right now too, that you had the option to pick a lot of your finishes in your house. So it's not custom, but it's not a true track home either. So we really, really like that, Jason. But they've got it down to a science, like I said. And I put a contract down, I think, in January of one year and moved in May. So whatever that is, January, February, March, April, May. I mean, the 5 months. But, they're geared up to do that. And they've got it down, and their construction was great. We had no issues on the walkthrough. And, we couldn't be happier with our builder particularly.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, they move fast, that's for sure. One thing, suggestion that I'll throw out there is we're actually working with some clients right now that are getting ready to do new construction on the golf course. And I thought it was a very savvy move on this gentleman's part. He came down and he really liked this one particular lot, had western exposure in the Naples area, and bought a couple of beach chairs from Walgreens and went over to that lot at night and sat there from like 5 o'clock to almost sunset not too long ago. And he and his wife were just sweating profusely, and they realized that they didn't want western exposure because it'd be just too hot to sit on the lanai every night. And so they end up shifting gears to a southern exposure, so they didn't have that kind of heat. So little things like that, and picking that lot, it's such a big decision. It's a great best practice to do before you pull the trigger.
Jason, same situation that my wife and I did, but we reversed it. And in that, I know when it's cooler here in the winter and we get that cold northeasterly wind that comes in, and we play the golf courses when it's breezy and cold. So I wanted to make sure that the back of my house was not facing north in the wintertime. And obviously a southern exposure is the best exposure you can always get. So again, had that opportunity to pick that out very easily, but mine was more from the cold more than it was the heat, interestingly.
Sure.
Yeah, Jeff here, if I can jump in on one other subject, something that people often don't pay enough attention to is the outdoor living, what you all are talking about. And, when you get into selection of your home, one of the things, if you like to be outside, whether it's 6 months a year or 9 months a year or year round, you want to think about, do we have a roof over our head in that space, that outdoor space, not under air, but just outdoor space? Because if you don't, in Florida in particular, as we all know, in the summer months, let's call it from June until September, you can almost set your clock to 3 o'clock and expect it to rain for some period of time. So that's another consideration, is what's the physical plant, how's it designed, and if outside living is important to you, you're going to want to take that into consideration as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to bring all three of you in on this last conversation before we jump to the Q&A, which is the transition from developer to the memberships. And you hear a lot of stories, some good, some bad, of developers when they leave, and that tense time frame of handing the club and the assets over. Can you each share just a couple minutes each of some experiences that you've gone through during turnover, and any suggestions or at least help the consumer posture for what to expect?
Well,
Jeff, we'll
I
start
can
with you.
jump in here. Yeah, I'll just jump in. Usually, my experience, I've worked in 4 different developments in the last 28 years, and that turnover typically starts right around 18 to 24 months. It depends on a lot of variables, but I would say that's pretty typical. And what happens is the formation of ad hoc advisory committees commences, and you want to keep pace with that group. And in the meeting minutes, they should be getting posted. If they're not, you want to seek out members that are on that committee to better understand, what it is you're going through. Is there going to be debt on the community at turnover or not? Has there been a capital reserve study done and a depreciation schedule in place for the community and all of its assets, and the club if it's a separate entity or not? That's a really important step of the process that you want to keep close to. A lot of people don't want to volunteer to be on a committee. They don't have the time, whatever the reason may be. But you want to keep close to those discussions and negotiations as they move forward. Financial information is imperative. And, those are the thumbnails that I always, respectfully talk about whenever I've gone through a transition of a development to the members and or the club.
Thanks, Jeff. Fred, we'll move over to you. Do you have any color to add or things to suggest?
Yeah, one thing that I think folks should be aware of, one of the major trends in the real estate industry for developers is to take out what's called a community development district bond when they begin developing. And basically that is an extra level of property taxes that ensures that the streets are going to go in as promised, the street lights are going to go in, and folks should be aware that that is something that continues after the developer turns the property over to the homeowners. It's pretty much forever that it'll be on the tax bill.
Very good, very interesting. Lynn, you went through a transition yourself as the head golf professional. What was that like on the front lines, if you will, is in watching the members and the developer work through that turnover?
Well, mine will probably be a little bit different than most, only because I was an employee of the developer. And we as golf professionals, and we've known from time to time that when the developer takes over, there's a major change in management. So, Jeff, to your point, the ad hoc committees got started. We were about 18 months out. And so I was the middle person between the ad hoc committees and the developer. And so
you lucky guy.
Yeah, right. It was interesting. I learned a lot. So you go to the ad hoc committee meetings, we're going to do this, we want to do this, and I'd have to take it back to the developer. Developer says, are they nuts? I'm not going to do that. So you have to go back and forth. And so anyways, it's those points that go back and forth, and they just, in my particular case, they just said, we can't wait to get the developer out of here, because they always, and I will tell you something, I think this is true majority of the time, and I don't think they understand how much that maybe the developer may be subsidizing it, and it's logical. I think everybody would understand why the developer does that. But they don't understand it. Now they take over, and this is the thing that always got me was, here are people who were very successful in life, in their businesses, in their careers. Now they come down, now they jump on all these different committee meetings, and running a club, even though it's a business, it's a lot different than running their business back where they came from. So anyways, they couldn't wait to take it over. And we had some contentious times. And, when it was all done at the end of it, they all said, well, that was a pretty amicable transition. And I said, if that's amicable, I don't want to go through a bad one. And, but anyways, it was turned over. Members take it over. That's a good time, because now they feel like they have control of it, and can control the future. Generally, there are some price increases because they do find out that it is costing more than what the developer was really charging them for. But it takes time, it settles down, and it does take 2 or 3 years after that. But in the end, it's what everybody wants, and it turns out just fine.
Very good. Well, thank you, 3 of you. Appreciate that. In this final slide here, we're just going to kind of recap and then get into the Q&A and final thoughts. So if you have any questions at the top of your mind, feel free to text them into that chat box to your right. First off, we talked about location, and Jeff gave you some great tips on how to determine the right market for you, what's important, lifestyle, weather, tax situation. I mean, there's a number of different factors that should go into that before you determine your location. Choosing a developer, Fred gave you some great insight on public versus private developers and what that means in terms of overall not only financial backing, but overall standards and whatnot. Your master association docs, the current budget of the developers, who's going to handle the maintenance and repairs, capital reserves, is the club debt free at turnover? All those things are questions you're definitely going to want to ask and get at least understand your position within that club before you join. And then Glenn gave you some great insight on golf course operations and where you're going to be at if you build a home on a golf course, and things to consider, whether you're going to be on the course itself, off the golf course, the dynamics of the club, whether it's going to be a bundled community where every home in the development has an attachment to a membership, or a non-equity versus equity setting. So we implore you, if you've attended this webinar, to attend our 5 questions to ask the membership director webinar. We're really getting into detail on those things, so that way you understand your position as a member at the club, even post construction. And then the transition from turnover when the developer hands off to the members. It definitely is going to happen at a given point, and you got to have your trusted elected officials on the committees representing you as the resident and the member. So those are definitely something that you'll have to go through at a given period of time. So this is the chance to ask any questions of Jeff, Fred, Lynn, or even myself. If you don't have anything, I did get a couple emails in with questions. One in particular was on the golf operation, Lynn. Does the golf course typically get built before the homes get put in, or is it a simultaneous process? So in other words, you could start construction while the golf course is being built.
No, most of the time the golf course is going to be in and ready. Look, that's the amenity that's drawing people in. They want to see the views. They want to know what the golf course is going to be. But I will tell you that the planning process of that, and that's why, who is the golf course architect? That's going to tell me a lot. But just mostly remember that if it's a developer building it, he's going to want to get in as many lots as he can from a pure dollar standpoint. So the land planner generally takes precedence over the golf course architect. And again, we didn't really talk about the bundled communities and different architecture styles and stuff, but generally the golf course goes in, then believe me, the engineers, it's all planned out on paper. So that's why they give you the schematics. They can show you the golf course. They can show you where your homes and the lots and where they face everything. So it's golf course first and then lots.
Okay. And Jeff, another email just came in on, is there any way for a consumer to have foresight on the perimeter outside of the development, whether it's going to turn into commercial, a Walmart going across the street, anything that a consumer can look at to see the future or guesstimate? Oh, Jeff, you might be on mute. I think we might have lost him. Fred, if you're on, are you able to answer that question?
Yeah, I would suggest, and that's a great question, because if there's 50 acres next door to the community that you're looking at that is beautiful wooded land, there's certainly a good chance in the next couple of years or so that will be developed, and probably your best source would be the particular county that you're looking in, and going down to the zoning office, and you can probably learn a lot about what the zoning is, if it's commercial or light industrial or whatever it may be. But probably the county zoning office would be your best source.
Hey, Fred, along that lines, if it's a developer development and they have it in a sales center on property, wouldn't you think that most of the time they know, whether they tell you or not might be a different story, but wouldn't they know pretty much of what's on borders or not?
Yeah, they should, absolutely. But whether you could really get, they're going to sugarcoat the answer no matter
Right.
what, as best they can.
Gotcha. Yep. Thanks.
And I'm sorry, I lost connection there with my internet for about 45 seconds, so I missed it. But on that note, I mean, I was a developer rep, and they should know the answer to any of those questions. Whether they're going to give you the solid answer or a sugar-coated answer is another story. We always gave a solid answer. I believed in honesty and truth, but it's certainly something to look into.
Sure. And Jeff, I got looks like one final question. This came in for you in particular. Is there a standard or a benchmark where a consumer can expect to have to come out of pocket for cash deposits to kick off new construction, whether it be the purchase of the lot or the foundation, so a developer can get going? Is there a standard number?
Yeah, you know, everyone's a little bit different, but absolutely, you're going to be, if you're working out of pocket, so to speak, your own cash, and you're not taking out a mortgage, that's going to be, that schedule should be in the contract when you're doing your lot purchase. You were talking about a lot purchase a little earlier, Jason. And I would say typically you have to come in with at least 10%, if not more, to just get going. And then, you know, once the permitting has been done and in place and commencement begins, there are draw schedules that will be, you know, identified in your contract as to when those draws will be expected. A bank is obviously, if you're working with a mortgage, they're controlling the draw schedule, so they're paying attention to that and have their inspectors come out and look at it and say, yep, that's okay, we're ready to go to the next phase. You're going to want to understand who's inspecting what and when those draws are scheduled, and everyone's different, but it should be in your contract. If it's not, ask for it.
Very good. Well, thank you all. I think I would just kind of close today with, if you are considering new construction and you haven't you know, went to developments, or even if you have and you would like us to help you with that and make sure that, you know, we're fighting for the best deal possible and maybe some increased upgrades or whatnot on your homes, as Jeff said later, the developer builds in commission or compensation for the real estate agent. So it doesn't cost you a dime to use, you know, someone like Golf Life Navigators or one of our partner agents around the country. They've all been extremely well trained by Jeff and Fred and others, and so that they can represent you on the build out. So feel free to let us know if you need any help. We're happy to do that. Jeff's email is at the bottom of the screen there. You shoot him an email. No matter what market you're interested in, we've got someone there that can help. And I would just finish up with kind of on a personal note. I'm going through the process myself, building a home, and never had done this before. And the one thing I thought was pretty interesting is my wife and I had to get a mortgage. And so most of the developers have their own mortgage programs, and by going through them, you oftentimes are getting major incentives. So we got $50,000 off of upgrades by using Pulte Mortgage Program. So definitely ask about that when you're considering which developer to go through. If you're planning on doing a mortgage and using that developer's mortgage program, they do offer one hell of an incentive for buyers, especially when you're trying to figure out all the upgrades and amenities that you need in the home. So just a little tip there that we learned. I was very, very happy about that at the end. Well, thank you all. I appreciate it. I'm going to have this recording and this webinar uploaded to the internet here this afternoon, so you'll be receiving an email with a copy of it in case you missed something or you'd like to re-listen. We always encourage feedback, so let us know if you had any additional questions or your general opinions of how it all went. And look for an email here soon with more webinars to come. We look forward to being that educational background for you as you make one of life's biggest buying decisions. Thank you so much, and we will talk to you soon.